Welcome to episode 329 of the Brainy Business, Understanding the Psychology of Why People Buy. In today's episode, I'm excited to introduce you to Hal Hershfield, author of Your Future Self. Ready? Let's get started.
You are listening to the Brainy Business Podcast, where we dig into the psychology of why people buy and help you incorporate behavioral economics into your business, making it more brain-friendly. Now here's your host, Melina Palmer.
Hello, everyone. My name is Melina Palmer, and I want to welcome you to the Brainy Business Podcast. In today's conversation, I'm joined by Dr. Hal Hershfield. Hal is a professor of marketing, behavioral decision-making, and psychology at UCLA's Anderson School of Management and holds the UCLA Anderson Board of Advisors Term Chair in Management. His research, which sits at the intersection of psychology and economics, examines the ways we can improve our long-term decisions. He earned his PhD in psychology from Stanford University. Dr. Hershfield publishes in top academic journals and also contributes op-eds to the New York Times, Harvard Business Review, the Wall Street Journal, and other outlets. He consults with the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, many financial services firms such as Fidelity, First Republic, Prudential, Morgan Stanley, Merrill Lynch, and Avantis, and marketing agencies such as Droga5. The recipient of numerous teaching awards, Hal was named one of the 40 most outstanding B-School profs under 40 in the world by business education website Poets and Quants. His book, Your Future Self, How to Make Tomorrow Better Today, published in June, and you know I am so excited about this one. Those of you who've been listening to the podcast and following me for a while know that I love time discounting, and this book and Hal's work are all about it. I can't wait to dig in and get right to it with you here today. Really quickly, before we get into the conversation, I want to be sure you know that there are links in the show notes for everything, including related past episodes, like the one on time discounting, which I just refreshed for you on Tuesday, links to articles, books, and so much more. It's all waiting for you in the app you're listening to and at thebrainybusiness.com/329. Now let's jump right in. Dr. Hal Hershfield, welcome to the Brainy Business Podcast.
Thank you, Melina. I'm happy to be here.
Oh, I'm so excited to have you here. I know I was trying not to gush too much, but the audience, I think, knows, especially those who've been here for a while, that time discounting is my very favorite. And so when I saw your book was coming out, I got so excited, and I'm delighted that you're here to chat with me today. So for everyone who doesn't yet know you, can you share a little bit about yourself and the work that you do?
Sure. So I'm Hal Hershfield, and I'm a professor of marketing, behavioral decision-making, and psychology at UCLA's Anderson School of Management. And I largely study long-term decision-making. Why do people often fall short of doing the things that they say that they want to do? So sort of understanding what happens. And then also really trying to figure out solutions and applications to help people do more of the things that they say that they want to do. That's probably my, where I sit in a nutshell.
Yeah. And like I said, I love this whole concept. And so a little bit of my background is, before getting into behavioral economics specifically, I was working in a financial institution. And when you look at things like saving money, as well as dieting and exercise programs and all of that, you end up in this space of people know what they should do. They know what they want to do. They understand it. And yet they still don't often do the right thing. And so when I started my, research and I was doing my master's and reading about, this thing called hyperbolic time discounting, which I call the I'll start Monday effect. Yes. I feel like
yes, exactly.
resonates a little bit better. We don't see ourselves in the future as we do, ourselves today. You go, oh, it just makes so much sense.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's funny because you said it really well. It's these decision-making domains or arenas where we kind of know the right thing and then we don't do it. And of course there's the exercise and dieting and saving money, but it's so many other things too. When you start looking, it's environmental decisions. It's like relationship decisions and how am I acting in this moment and parenting decisions and, all these other areas of life where there's any sort of consequence now and later for some sort of action. That's where I think a lot of these ideas become relevant.
Yeah, for sure. And like you said, as you get the first thing of like, oh yeah, like I get the, like, I'm going to get up at 5 a.m. on Monday.
Right.
And
right.
Monday never comes, right? That we all know how that goes. But then as you start to look and go, oh, I do it here. I do it there. It's all of these things. So personally, I really enjoyed the beginning of the book, and you're talking about this sort of like, what is the self and how do we define all of this? I feel like, I'm guessing that was pretty fun to write and to research, and not just because of some of the very interesting interviews that you got to to do. But do you want to share a little bit about this, I guess, concept of how we even define the self? I thought it was a cool way to start off the book.
Yeah. I mean, so a lot of what I sort of get into there in the beginning of the book and in my thinking is, what do we even sort of mean by who we are now and who we are later? And, the way that I think about it is that, the way that many researchers have thought about it as well, right? The self is kind of this bundle. It's this bundle of associations, emotions, feelings, thoughts, ideals, etc. And it's something that has some stability over time, but also can change quite a bit, right? And so, when I was doing the research for the book, I started by thinking, well, are we sort of the same over time or are we not? And of course, it's such a complicated question that it begets a really complicated answer. We're not the same, and we're not necessarily totally different. There's parts that change and there's parts that stay the same. And as we start thinking about ourselves over time, what becomes important is, what are the aspects of the self that we're considering? And I think, the nutshell version of this is that at the core, we have sort of these moral traits. And those are the things that I think we really point to as the things that we want to have stay the same. If I see you, the morality that's at the core of you, if that sort of goes unwavering over time, I say, well, Melina's basically the same person. But if those things change, then I'm not so sure. Like, maybe now you're totally different than you were when I first met you 20 minutes ago.
Right. But the best 20 minutes ever, right? So
yeah.
I'm fundamentally changed since we've been able to talk.
Right. There we go. That's right.
But I mean, the other piece, and I know, okay, so because I'm too excited about all the things, I'm going to jump around.
That's fine by me. In
a way that I'm sure doesn't follow the book. And some of
that's totally okay.
Okay. But, even just looking at asking people if you were to rate how similar you are to yourself of, 10 years ago, or yourself 10 years from now, or 10 minutes from now, and like all of these, and how close, like 3 years and 10 years and how this all goes. I just really enjoy, as we think about how we think about our present, past, and future selves, I think is kind of fascinating. And I would love to hear you speak about it. Obviously, I read about it, but I think it'll be interesting for the audience.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think at the first level here, one of the things to consider is that in many ways, people think of their future selves as if they're other people. And that's, that's of course an analogy. It's like, it doesn't work out perfectly. Right. But when you start with that assumption, then it becomes really interesting to start to think about some of the decisions that we started by talking about, right? These, the saving, eating, et cetera. Because what you start to realize is, if my future self is this other person and I'm not that connected to them, like I don't feel an emotional bond, then I'm probably going to I won't be that likely to do things for their benefit. It'd be like asking me to do stuff to benefit a total stranger on the street, right? I mean, sometimes I'll do it, but I don't know how often, right? But the similarity then becomes really relevant because, like, for instance, I'm clearly a separate person from my best friend. I'm a separate person from my wife and my kids, but like, I feel a great degree of emotional overlap with my spouse, with my kids, with my parents, and that overlap predicts the likelihood that I'll, do things for them and help them out and want to make, quote unquote sacrifices. Right. And so the same ideas apply, I think, to our future selves. If they are other people, but other people that we're really like tightly connected to, that we just see the similarity, then I think it becomes that much more likely that we will at least try to do the things today that'll benefit them later.
Yeah. I really loved that point. As far as, so my husband and I are essentially one human.
Yeah.
Like it's not that way with everyone, of course. Yeah. But like it's definitely a we situation, right?
Yeah.
Like, oh, well, we don't do that. Like,
Yeah.
we don't like those things and whatnot. Right. And so being able to see that layer of overlap, which, is the most with my husband, to be sure. But then, you have friends or family members, and the Venn diagrams are maybe not quite so much of a circle as you see with that.
Yeah,
and then you're able to layer that, like you said, as you think about yourself in the future. Do I have the relationship with my future self that I have with my husband, or with somebody that I'm less connected to? I don't want to like throw out any
names. Yeah.
Yeah. Someone else who maybe I know less.
Yeah.
Right. But,
Right.
Or like an acquaintance from work or something, right? Where it's like, I like them, but doesn't connect all that same amount. And so, but then we think about what impact this has for us over time. It really matters how much our Venn diagram's a circle, right? With our future self.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I love the description you have of you and your husband, and that's, and then it's funny to say, well, is that the relationship I have with my future self, right? But the sort of idea of like the we, rather than the sort of separation. There's me and there's them, right? I think what's important about that idea is that that sort of like collective aspect of identity, it's going to help out when it comes to making decisions that might benefit that future version of you, but also you now, right? In the same way, I think it's not just one-sided, right? So with your husband, it's like you might do something that benefits him. It might also benefit you because you feel a sense of connection to him, right? And so, it's like, I've always wondered this, if I could just, with saving, it's like, it's not just that I'm saving for the future and I can't spend now. Like, there are ways to reframe it so that I also get some pleasure out of the idea that I've done something good, quote unquote good for future me. And I know that's like a really sort of like vanilla surface level example, right? But I think that is one of the sort of ways to think about these sorts of decisions.
Yeah. I am pretty sure that this was from Dan Willingham's book, To Outsmart Your Brain, which is about better studying and stuff. Really awesome book. And everyone who wants to do a better job of reading and learning things, highly recommend, even if this didn't come from there. But I think it was this book, but someone was reframing the idea of, if you want to put off the studying or whatever it is, and we have a lot of that, you think your motivation is going to hold, right? You've got 16 hours of time, right? And this sort of thing. And so, well, I got 2 really good hours and I got through 2 chapters, and I bet that's going to continue all the way through. So I'm going to go watch Netflix for 6 hours now and then come back.
And then go back, because I'll still be able to maintain that same level of energy.
Right. But this reframe being something along the lines of, instead of saying like, how much do I want to do this thing now, is, sort of in this vein of like, how much will I regret this later? Or like, if I was in the moment now and having to do it, how upset will I be at myself? How much will I dislike it at that point compared to how I feel about this thing right now? And being able to even just take the moment to disassociate and think about how bad you'll feel then can make such a big difference in doing a little bit of something right now.
Yeah. I think it's such a good way to think about things. I mean, I think about this a lot with so many different decisions, right? and sometimes you still have to say, well, you know what? I'm not going to enjoy it, but I'm still going to go through with it. It's like, I mean, Friday night I went out with my brother-in-law, and we haven't been out in ages. I haven't been out in ages. And it was like, we stayed out, and I should probably go home now. And we just stayed out a little bit too late. And I knew, you know what? I'm not going to like this tomorrow morning, but well, whatever.
Worth it.
But I mean, so it's like sometimes it doesn't always, the math doesn't always work out. But at the same time, I think that idea of, not what are my feelings now, but how will I look back on this is a really nice way to sort of step into the shoes of your future self and sort of reassess these different decisions.
Yeah. And like, do I want to feel I think the other thing he was saying too is like, how much will I value the relief that I feel knowing it's done? Right. So looking at both the like, how much regret will I feel and like, how nice will it be to have, these 3 hours of time where I have it done instead of feeling stressed at the end? And is that better than going to watch the movie right now?
And I think that, that's the thing that's really nice about that is that you take a decision that we're normally only looking at one side of, which is, will it feel nice to watch the movie? And adding sort of the other side of, so there's some researchers who call this the hidden zero effect. So, you say the classic decision, I know you said you love the temporal discounting, right? But the classic decision is, do I want $10 now or $20 in 2 weeks? But both of those leave out, the hidden zero, which is to say, another way to sort of spell that out is, do I want $10 now and $0 in 2 weeks? Or do I want $0 now and $20 in 2 weeks, right? And so it's like, I think applied to your example with the, studying, it's like, do I want to watch a show right now and feel regret later?
Right.
Or do I not want to watch a show right now and feel relief later that I did this thing, And so the answer may still be idiosyncratic, right? And there may be times where you say, screw it, I still want to watch the show.
Yeah.
But at least you've thought through the full outcome matrix, if you will, a little bit, in a little bit of a deeper way.
Yeah. Yeah. And helping to just see the choice for more of what it is, knowing that there are so many variables in the multiverse of life, right? Of like what could happen if this or that or the other. And we have to have some way of making a decision, but.
Exactly.
So one of the things that I really enjoyed about your book, amongst all of the things, is, but I like this, analogy, metaphor, what have you, of the missing your flight and packing the wrong clothes and your poor trip planning. I think it makes it, one, it's just fun to read. And it also helps compare it to something that we do. And then you can like see this other layer. Can you talk a little bit about that, which is like the bulk of the book, but
yeah, totally. So just to reframe your question, the first thing you said was that it was really fun to read. Okay, so
very
right. I just want to emphasize that. No, so I mean, one of the things that I talk about in the book is the times when we make, quote unquote, mistakes with our mental time travel. By that I mean traveling ahead in our mind's eye to some later point in time. And, the way that I outline the mistakes is, are other sort of three versions of them. So one is, I call it missing your flight. And the idea is, the analogy is that you go to the airport, you're ready to go. It's not like you haven't thought about the future. You've got this trip planned. You get there, you're a little early for your flight. You go have a beer in the airport bar. And like, before you know it, you look up and it's like boarding and you've missed the flight, right? And the application to mental time travel is that we essentially get so anchored on right now that we almost fail to look up and, remember, oh, there's this future that I have to plan for. I'm so drawn into the present moment that it influences everything I'm doing, right? Now, the sort of second level mistake is I do think ahead to the future, but I engage in what I call poor trip planning. So I think everybody's had this experience where it's like, you might plan whatever sort of trip, if something is as on the one hand, like just a car travel trip where you're going somewhere else to a flight somewhere, whatever, if you're so lucky, whatever it is, you're going on the trip and then you get there and you realize that you've done very little to plan the actual trip itself other than like, how am I getting there? Right. And there can be something that's like beautiful about the spontaneity, right? In theory, and in practice, you may waste half your trip figuring out what the next thing to do is, right? And so applied to mental time travel, there are these times when we tell ourselves that we've thought ahead, we're going to do this thing or not do this thing. And then we don't really think through the future on a detailed level. It's more just on the surface. And we end up arriving at a future that may look different from the one that we had quote unquote planned for. I point to procrastination as a great example of that, right? Where you're like, yeah, I'll do that thing. I'll just do it in a week. And it's like, really? Are you really going to want to do the same thing that you're avoiding right now in a week's time? And then the third version is, I call it like packing the wrong clothes. Basically, you do plan for the future, but in planning for the future, you get so anchored on what's happening right now that you project that ahead to the future. It's like, when you go on a trip and you're going to a place that's different weather than where you're in, and you say, yeah, I know it's going to be hot there and it's cold where I am now, but I should still pack some sweaters, and you waste half your bag, on stuff you don't need. No, I mean, that's like a silly example. It doesn't really matter. But there's times in life when we lock ourselves into plans, or we're not that flexible because we're so focused on how we're feeling right now and think that's how we'll continue to feel later, even if we won't.
Yeah. And with that, like you're saying, the kind of unaccounted for sort of consequences that come from it. Like you were saying, it's like, okay, so I had a sweater in my bag that I didn't end up wearing, and like, who cares? But like you say, if you checked a bag and you had the extra expense or you had to buy new clothes when you got there because you packed wrong, and being, that's the metaphorical example of these sorts of things we do all the time. So we can like tie that into what that means for you in your day-to-day life. But I think that it just helps to see how we do all these things all the time. And you do a good job of kind of layering that into other decisions too.
Well, I appreciate that, but it's funny because the packing the wrong bag, like you said, it's like, in the actual travel example, it's like, okay, so I have to buy a lightweight jacket when I get to San Francisco because I didn't realize how cold it would be. Okay, so what? But then there are these cases, you brought up the example of saying, oh, okay, I'm studying at a good clip. I'll be able to maintain this energy level later. Or other researchers have pointed to that same example with entrepreneurs, where you say, I've started off a project, a new business, and I'm really excited and it's going, and I think I'll be able to maintain that level. And that's not really that fair to my future self because, that version of me may eventually get tired or burnt out or need a break. And then there's a question of like, how sustainable will it actually be for me to keep going at this same rate? Right. And so, and that can really be detrimental if I don't think through that carefully.
For sure. Yeah. I have the 4 things that I talk about together that I think really bundle up on us and keep us stuck, whether it's like, so I do a talk where it's like at the conference where you plan like, oh, when I get home, I'm going to do all the things. Like I heard about this and I got excited, or you listen to the podcast, you read the book, whatever it is. And you think you're going to do it all again when you get back on Monday. Right. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And then you have all the emails and things you get back to, you don't end up doing it. So I think that the 4 things that really stack up against us are, of course, time discounting, optimism bias. So like we think we're going to get more done than we actually can, planning fallacy. So we don't allocate for all the extra things that are going to come up, the emails, the interruptions, and all those things. We don't have time for them. And then the bike shedding piece where we look at, if you're trying to do too many things, it's easy to productively procrastinate on all of them and never actually get anywhere, so picking like one thing that matters that's really important and do a little bit at a time is always the advice that I give.
And it makes so much sense. I think it's great because a little bit of progress on a lot of things results in no like actually completed projects or tasks.
Yeah. And that's like, I'll ask people, right? Do you want to get to the end of the year and have done a couple of things on 20 tasks, like 20 big ticket items that you were hoping you were going to do? Or do you want to have 2 things that you fully completed?
Right. Exactly. And maybe someone says a little bit of things on 20. Okay. But if that's what you want.
Well, good for you.
Yeah.
Enjoy your not really getting stuff done world, but it's a good fit for some people. As you look to, a business context and application here, like you said, some piece with entrepreneurs and people getting kind of burnt out, or you get too excited about something or taking on the project, whether it's that entrepreneur or the intrapreneur working on stuff. Like, how do you think this applies to people when it comes to their work in varying aspects?
It's a great question. So, I think there's a couple different levels, right? So on the first level, I think, there's like an easy connection of, well, am I doing projects that are short-term focused or long-term one? And I don't mean to make that sound like such a black and white or like silly question, right? But I think it can be very easy, no matter what the workplace, to get focused on the, the classic distinction, the urgent versus important. And, the urgent tends to be short-term and the important tends to be long-term, but you can always put it off, right? And so I think if I were to, think about like sort of like the tightest connection between my book and the research that I've been doing and the work world, it is figuring out, well, what are my sort of long-term plans and goals here? Am I getting too short-term focused by doing the urgent rather than the important? And how can I make a shift there? Right. So I think that is one of the sort of first level questions. But then this, it also becomes interesting because so much of what I talk about is on the individual level. And when you get into sort of the workplace, well, you can talk about it on the individual level because you can talk about employees, but you can also talk about it more on the collective, So do we collectively see ourselves as an organization that will fundamentally change over time or remain the same? Or what are the aspects of us that we want to maintain between now and some later point in time? And have we even thought about that? And, these are all the big questions that I would start asking if I were to try to apply some of these ideas in more of a workplace type setting. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, for sure. And knowing that organizations are made up of humans for the most part, right?
Well, like a dog organization. Yeah, that's fairly true.
You get some machines in there these days, right? So
okay, that's fair. Yes,
so a little bit of AI or something.
Yes, that's fair.
But in general, you still have people doing things, and as you start to layer them on top of each other, I think it just gets more complex, right? So it's important to know it on an individual level, so you know how it's happening for you. If you're interacting with one of your teammates or an employee, if they are getting stuck and they keep packing the wrong clothes, right? You're able to look and go, hey, maybe we should look at this, planning better for what's to come. And we don't have to bring all the sweaters in the way of like, we know that when we get there, we might be able to buy a sweater if we need one.
Right.
Versus bringing everything with us.
Yeah.
And loss aversion definitely being an issue coming up there.
I think that is right. But I also like what you're saying there too about the sort of, interacting levels, right? And the interactions between the way I see things moving forward and the way you might see things and the way that, somebody who's an employee does versus someone who's my boss. And then to model that out is really complicated. And it's not something I've thought extensively about in an empirical way. And it would be great to be able to sort of look into that more.
Yeah. I think it's interesting, too, like you're saying, is as an organization, being able to see if you're following one of these personas. And I think being able to break it down into these kind of three things, right? Are we missing the flight? Are we packing the wrong clothes? Or are we doing, suffering from poor trip planning? And see whether it's by teams or by the company as a whole to say, if you have a bunch of things that aren't really doing what you want them to, or you are late on projects, or things aren't getting over the finish line, or they're not having as much zhuzh, as you think they should, because you didn't have the time when you got there, you were procrastinating or whatever it is, to be able to look back and say, which of these cultures might we be suffering from? And we can learn from what the individuals are doing to try to overcome that as an organization.
No, I think that's I think you said that really well. That makes a lot of sense to me.
Thanks. Yeah, I think it would be interesting. So I feel like if any company is wanting to do this and do some research, right, reach out to Hal.
Yeah, there you go. Exactly. I love it.
Well, speaking of your research, and I know that, by the time a book comes out, it's based on, research and things you wrote at least 6 months before, and that you were probably researching years previous, and you're still doing lots of other work and things now. So as you're looking into the future, what are you excited about now? And, what are you continuing to build on? And, maybe it's from feedback from the book or anything else.
Yeah, no, these are great questions. So, I've so many different things. I know it would be funnier if I said nothing. I'm just tired right now.
Maybe partially true, and you're still excited about stuff.
So Right now I'm with one of my grad students, Megan Weber. We're sort of going a lot deeper on the sort of commitment devices. I know that we didn't talk about this much, but, there's this sort of idea, and I know a lot of other books have talked about commitment devices, but I sort of take this lens of, what we're trying to do here is say, how can I put some guardrails on some future behavior to do more of the things that I want to do or stop some of the things I don't want to do? And very little is known about what are the sort of antecedents of those, or like what are the predictors of who adopts those? Because, it turns out there's some commitment devices that are wildly effective and people don't adopt them, for a variety of reasons. And so I'm really excited about this. Maybe partially, I just had a long call with her earlier, but I'm partially excited about this because we're trying to figure out, what's predictive of who takes these up, and can we sort of inject that into others to help people do the things that they say that they want to do. So that's like one space that I'm really excited about. Another space I'm really excited about is like thinking about these sorts of questions more in the, very long term. So thinking about, collective decisions, environmental decisions, end of life planning. End of life planning has been something I've been interested in for years, but I've never really quite put my finger on how I want to look at that. But in writing the book, one of the things I came across was these letter writing exercises where people would write letters to their loved ones to be delivered after they died, which is, it's really emotional to think about.
I was getting my nails done while I was reading the book, and I have my iPad and I'm scrolling through it, and I was just like actually starting to cry as I was reading in this part of the book.
Geez.
I remember it, and it's, partially for having young kids and all that anyway.
Right,
but that particular story was one that was like, oh,
yeah, no, it's emotional to think about some of these things, and I guess in a way I would rather that than something that is, too sterile, right? And not feeling, but then, looking at whether or not any of these sorts of exercises can be used to help with end of life planning. And which is like one of these topic areas that's a lot of people care about, but, it's very hard to study. Some people don't want to talk about it, and so I'm thinking, more and more about that. The other, can I tell you one other thing that I'm really excited about? Yeah. So one other project that I'm really excited about right now that to some extent derives from some of the thinking that occurred during the book. This is with one of my colleagues, Ali Lieberman, who's also in the book. When I had my first kid, one of my friends from work who's has a little bit of a dark sense of humor said, one day, I'm sure you've heard this sort of thing, right? One day will be the last day you pick up your kid and you won't know it. Have you ever heard that saying?
No.
Sorry, is that real? Okay. So, all right. I don't want to get too dark and, it's funny because you could interpret that darkly, or you could say like, well, there's, it's
like live in the moment and enjoy what you have.
Yeah. And, you're living through life and, and so we had been talking about this. My colleague Ali and I had been talking about this, and so the end of my book really talking about sort of the balancing out of the present and the future, and when to sort of like lean into the present and when to not, and what do I want to look back on. And one of the things that so my version of the like picking up the kid thing is like there will be a day when like neither kid wants to spend time with me, right? Or in theory, and
I refuse to believe it's the case.
I refuse to believe that, right?
Yeah,
exactly. And that knowledge, look, sometimes I'm still like, I'm sorry, no, you have to go do your own thing. I'm like, whatever, I'm doing something else right now, or like. Sometimes I still am on my phone, but the knowledge, it's a thought that I've been having more and more lately. And it's not like it's a constant that I'm like, oh, this is the last time of this, but it's like thinking ahead to a distant point in the future when things will be different. And part of the reason that I'm sort of obsessed with this idea right now is because, starting the research on this book, so much that I was focused on was this idea that, there will be similarities. Things will be the same. You should take care of your future self. And this really flips it around to say like, things will be very different. But your values may still be the same. And what am I going to want to look back on? So one of the things that we're doing right now is trying to sort of, quote unquote, use this idea as almost a behavioral change intervention. in a variety, not just with like parents and kids, but, a variety of different things. Right. So that is one of the other sort of project areas that I'm really excited about now.
Oh, yeah. Well, that made me think of similar and yet a different application, I guess. But a friend of mine, this was several years ago now, but she'd always had a sort of tumultuous relationship with her mom, right? As many people have with family members. And I hadn't seen her in a while, and we were catching up, and she had mentioned, so her mom had recently been diagnosed with a terminal cancer, and that she was talking about how like she just was sort of getting over those sorts of things, and where, it might have been difficult in the past because they lived long distance too. So it was a, relationship by phone.
Added layer. Yeah.
Right. And so she said she would always just try to have these better conversations and not get upset, because every time she would hang up the phone, knowing that it could be the last time that she got to talk to her mom, to which me being me, of course, like acknowledging like that's really hard. And like, isn't that always the case? That's like kind of a lesson in life anyway, right? Like,
right. It is really, yeah. It's that's such of course, right? And it's like, of course that's true. And yet at the same time, it's like almost too much to deal with, right? Like to sort of like, to keep that mindset, it's like, it makes sense in a way, like for her, she's got that cloud, there's that overwhelming, salient notion, right? And so, and you're right, that it could always be the case. And yet like, it'd be kind of hard to continue to live our lives, go, day to day, to just constantly be like, this could be the last, but.
Right. But then it's maybe like, don't get like the thing that if this was the last time I was going to talk to them, I'd be like, I would really feel bad about saying this thing. Like maybe I don't say it, because it always could be like, would I care about this thing 5 minutes from now, 5 years from now? Like those sorts of, like we say, the mental time traveling. And it's amazing to think of how often we're going like forward and back and side to side. And
I love the way you said that, forward and back and side to side, because it's exactly right. It's like, it's not so linear,
Yeah.
and then we do it a lot when it comes to, there actually was a study that tried to look at, the experience sampling study of mental time travel. And we do spend a lot of our time in the future, but like the very, very, very proximal future. Like what am I going to do for dinner tonight? Like, what's my schedule look like tomorrow? But like, I'm not regularly spending my time thinking about like, well, what will I be doing in 5 years? And of course not. Like it would be it wouldn't make a lot of sense, right? Like I live in the present. So, why should I always be doing that? But we probably don't do it quite enough.
But it is amazing when you think about as you're doing planning, right? And we just jump around so much and don't even realize, in one train of thought, could be talking about, well, 10 years from now, I'm probably going to be doing this, but, because of tomorrow. And like last time I did that, I didn't really like it. But then I remember like when I thought about this yesterday, I was looking at X, Y, right? You just like jump so much. It's just fascinating when you think about how much, like I said, we're all over the place all of the time.
Yep. I think that's exactly right. We are all over the place all the time.
Yeah. And maybe taking a little bit of time to be more thoughtful to, as we jump around, is it helping us to go to the place we want to get to eventually? Taking some time to plan where you want to be and like keep that as a touchstone as you go would be my advice. What advice do you have for people as they're like working toward their future self? Well,
I think, if I can like almost jump off of what you were saying, I think there's a version of mental time travel that's almost undirected and kind of like reactive, right? And I think we spend a lot of our time just going through life that way. But I think if we try to apply a little bit more of intention, if you will, to mental time travel, it's not saying that we should always be living in the future, right? The living for the future. Like, I think that would actually be a mistake, right? But rather, thinking through, when I have a choice, why am I doing what I'm doing? Maybe that means go for it today, live in the moment right now. Maybe it means actually I should probably pull back and like think about how this is going to impact things later on. But if we have that sort of like intentional lens to it, that may up the chances that we arrive at a future that we're satisfied with.
Yeah, definitely. I just saw this morning, someone had shared a video from an old clip I think it was Viktor Frankl, and it was talking about how he was taking flying lessons, and that it was saying that so that the pilots do something called crabbing. My dad's a pilot, so you think I would know this, but like if there's a crosswind, right? So if you want to go, like you're trying to head east and land at the airfield, but there's a crosswind, you're actually having to fly at an angle. And if you were to fly straight, you would undershoot and like end up way south of essentially the airport. And so you have to be flying like northeast to hit east. And so your like plane is kind of going sideways like the whole way that it goes to like counter the crosswinds. He's making this, you have to be like overshooting to help it to land to its what it actually can do, which is really interesting sort of analogy.
Yeah, no, it's a great analogy to, it's also a great analogy to the idea that we probably shouldn't always engage in such linear planning.
Perhaps that'll be our ending lesson point here, because as we know, I could talk to you all day long. So we'll go ahead and close with that. Ben, for everyone, of course, there will be links to get your future self in the show notes. And for everyone who's excited to get that and to learn more about you and to connect, what's their best path to do so?
Oh yeah, that's great. You can go to halhershfield.com or find me on LinkedIn or Twitter. I'm happy to connect and engage. I appreciate this.
Awesome. We'll, of course, have those links in the show notes for all the future selves who are listening to this and planning. And I don't know, it's getting too meta for that, but we'll say thanks and see you next time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you again to Dr. Hal Hershfield for joining me on the show today. What got your brain buzzing in today's conversation? For me, I'm such a nerd for time discounting and all of Hal's research. I had to apologize to him for being such a weirdo fangirl that I got to talk to him today. As I said in the episode, I really enjoyed the way Hal talked about this in terms of going on a trip. I think that comparison made it so you can really relate to these 3 types of ways that time discounting can impact your behavior, so you can evaluate if you want to make a change. Are you packing the right clothes? Did you plan well? Did you get distracted and miss your flight? Whether you're looking at the things you do individually as a person, trying to be more empathetic to people on your team, say when they miss a deadline or get distracted or procrastinate, or if you want to just better understand why your whole team or organization is maybe not meeting their objectives, there are so many ways that time discounting and the insights from Hal's book, Your Future Self, can help. There are, of course, links in the show notes for you to get your copy of Your Future Self, to learn more and connect with Hal, as well as to check out related past episodes like mine on time discounting and lots of other great stuff. It's all waiting for you in the app you're listening to and at thebrainybusiness.com/329. And thank you again to Hal Hershfield for joining me on the show today. It was a delight to chat with and learn from you. Join me Tuesday for another brainy episode of the Brainy Business Podcast. It's going to be a lot of fun. You won't want to miss it. Until then, thanks again for listening and learning with me. And remember to be thoughtful.
Thank you for listening to the Brainy Business Podcast. Melina offers virtual strategy sessions, workshops, and other services to help businesses be more brain-friendly. For more free resources, visit thebrainybusiness.com.